if you have not joined for one of these before, this is a writer's cut, so kind of like a director's cut, but I'm going to go through an article that I had written for a magazine and kind of talk through it and add a little bit more color into it. A lot of things end up on the cutting room floor, and I try not to do too many takes of this, so it'll be a little bit rough. This is my second take. There were too many buttons undone on my shirt previously, so we're better now, and we'll just see how this goes. This article is called Meet Me in the Middle. So it's the processing bottleneck breaking Virginia's farms, and we'll dive in. Beautiful. I really like this picture, but then again, I took it. All right. So when it comes to processing animals raised on small farms for commercial sale, farmers face a road that often leads to a dead end. Sometimes, literally, always figuratively. Picture this. A farmer spends months, maybe years, raising an animal with the care and attention some people don't give to their pets. Then, when the time comes to process the animal, they're forced into a system so broken it makes DMV lines look efficient. The results? Grueling drives to faraway facilities, endless waiting, and an end of the line that's anything but dignified for the animal. I've been there. As someone who's processed animals with small farms across the region, including the two featured in this article, I've seen the hard work and care that goes into raising animals the right way. Yet time and again, the same story emerges. Farmers pouring their hearts into their animals only to face a broken system when it's time for processing. I, like many others, want my food to be treated well in life and in death, whether it's a peach or a pig. That level of care happens best at a smaller scale. But how much does my wish cost? What's the price of meat raised by someone who genuinely cares and is transparent and safe? That is the billion-dollar question. And a couple things to clarify on this too. So the two farms I was referring to is because I was doing shoots at them, and it's hard to retain staff, people that know what they're doing or have been trained enough, and then want to keep, doing it because, it's not a continuous, usually at smaller facilities. It's not always a continuous thing. For the place where I went for turkeys over at Judd's place. Kelly Bronze. So part of that is that's a different style of operation. So there's not like a uniform sense of like processing facilities. And you have to realize too that a majority of companies, I go into this later, but there's a few companies that process pretty much all of them. Like you can go on a map online and look up, and it was hilarious because I would pull up the map and it'd show like, oh, these are all the slaughter facilities. And then, just past the first glance, you realize like, all right, well, half of these are owned by companies that have their own stock. You could submit in. But when you actually look at it, if you're not raising a copious amount of COPA, meat joke. But if you're not raising a large quantity, you're basically your options. You only get really one or two that are kind of at your scale that can like fit you in. Something comes up, and then those smaller ones too, it's tough because they don't have a full operation going. And when I say full, I mean they don't have things just like, they're also probably farming too, and then try to be more efficient by opening the processing facility. But when I talk to those farmers, a lot of the times, haven't talked to all of them, they go, I would not advise for somebody else to do this. So there's a problem in if we want animals to be treated well, and that's what this speaks to and Meet Me in the Middle is I'm just so big on the pragmatism that we've lost. So we don't have pragmatic options anymore. It's either buy super cheap meat for a cheap price, for the consumer to help them save. Long-term costs are on your body, right? And then on the small scale, it's like, that's done the way it should. I would say the way it should be done. How much does that cost? And then it's something you can't afford. So, and it goes back to this line I keep talking about, which is good food. Welcome to the modern food system where everything's either going to kill you or bankrupt you. Your choice. So it's kind of tough though, but that's this whole meet me in the middle. That middle is trying to figure out like at what scale can you get to so that it's efficient for the processing in the back end. Because it doesn't matter if you can raise these animals almost to perfection, not only for their livelihood, but for taste and flavor, for what it does for the land, sequestering carbon, whatever else. If you can't get it to market and sell it, then what was the point? And a lot of us are still, and we were all built into this convenience, right? So we want to do the bulk buy. And if you don't know cooking as much, it's not like you can buy a half cow and know what to do with all those other parts, or pig or chicken, doesn't matter, right? So at the end of the day, it's not like a blame on anybody. It's just stating that right now there's this massive, and I'll get into the hourglass, but there's a gap. There's a big gap in there in terms of scale. I will continue. The meat processing business is like an hourglass, says Tyler Thomas, owner of Yardball Meats in Roanoke, attributing the metaphor to another butcher. At the top, you have a large supply of small farms raising animals. At the bottom is a demand from customers eager for quality meat. But in the middle, there's this bottleneck. Processing facilities is where everything slows down. So it's not just at the scale too, but you do have, people are making all this, raising all these animals, and then people want it, but for the amount of time that it takes, or like when you're able to go, or when you get slots, like I literally talked to people that said that we're getting them over a year out. And COVID's changed some of that. But this has been kind of an ongoing thing. It's not like it just started in the past 10 years or something. You had a lot of get big, get out starting in the 60s and into the 70s. And then, so you had this scaling, and that's kind of what I go over in this bottleneck, is like, it was really good at first. Like, vertical integration can be great, but up to a certain scale, right? And on the small end, it's terrible if it's just, we have one cow, we got ready, process it, get it, like you got to sell that thing for 10 grand. And then at the other end, you have where it's completely vertically integrated, where all the animals are being raised in another country, and then, the efficiencies, and then the care goes out the window, the quality also. So how do we foster that middle ground and meet people in the middle, dare I say? But yeah, that's where it slows down. So Thomas's Butcher Shop prides itself on transparency. When someone buys ground beef from us, I can tell them the name of the farmer, the day the animal was harvested, and the journey it took to get there, he says. But the bottleneck impacts even the best intentioned butchers. So this is also a good point in terms of like, you say, know your farmer, and he has a sign that he has up there that says, know your butcher. And it's a really good point, as long as your butcher is somebody like him, because he does care about, keeps up with the farmers. And they're don't get me wrong, like I think most that you meet are like that. But you have to also realize, if it's a larger butcher shop and they have a bunch of employees, like there's only one person doing that procurement. And, I am this type of Portlandia where I'll walk in and be like, tell me about the farm it came from. Can I visit? You don't want to do that. But you do just want to ask, like, oh, where the farm, what farm this animal came from. And it'll usually be on the sign at most butcher shops. Like, they'll have a direct line because they'll get a large piece of meat and then, or, half cow, whole cow, half pig, whatever, and then cut that up. So, but you can't ask them that, and then just try to figure out what's one better question that you can maybe ask them too. Like, oh, cool, do you know how these animals are raised, like any of the practices? And if they don't know, give them a mulligan on that. But, okay, well, I'll come back next time. I just like learning about that stuff and kind of helping to foster some of that interest in, these folks too. But it is very difficult. There's one person doing that procurement, and that message doesn't always get passed along. It's the same thing in a restaurant. The chef is ordering that food. They may know what farm that's coming from. If they order from farms, it's really tough with margins. But if they are ordering it, they can. But the server's not going to know. And I would do that to tons of them, where I'd go into restaurants and I'd order by farm. Like if they put that little sign at the bottom, like this farm, like I'll take whatever you have from that farm. And they'd be like, oh, it's an outdated menu, I think. And it's like, like, know who you're giving a hard time or who you're asking something of. But I think it is really helpful to ask those questions, but be patient with the answers. Because it may take time for people to figure it out, because we have to ask for people to be interested in finding those. I digress. Facilities are often far from the farms he sources from, necessitating expensive delivery services for farmers, which adds strains to already thin margins. For many small farms, securing USDA-inspected processing slots is a logistical gamble. Farmers must predict the future of their herds months, even years before animals are ready for harvest. I should have phrased that a little differently, but not years, like 2 years, 3 years. I never heard that though, but more of the idea and the more baffling things that I heard was, we have harvesting slots before the animals are born. That's a little strange to me. Because you're trying to gauge, like, how much do I feed this animal? What do I put it on? And again, for the health and welfare, we'll call it, of the animal. You're raising it up to a certain, and there's a lot of cost involved in this. Like to keep an animal that is already at weight that you could process, and then you got to keep it for another 3 weeks because your processing date, that's 3 more weeks of, feed or whatever that is. So it definitely changes the economics of it, that when you can't be able to process on a certain date. And just to cover the baseline of all of this too, I think if you're listening to this, you already know a good amount about meat or processing or whatever else. But if you don't, I totally forgot where I was going with that. And we're not going to cut that out. But if you don't know a whole lot about meat, it is, there's not a lot of facilities. What was I going to say? It's really, difficult to kind of gauge when you're ready to go and to process. So it's not something that you can just, call up and you can switch slots sometimes with people, but a lot of the times, like, you really have to plan it way out in advance. And if something comes up like this smaller processing facility or one that is more, customizable or whatever else, like what if they have a cleanup or something happens on their farm, you have to reschedule that date. So it's a thin line. I'll get back to what I was thinking of earlier. Adding to the complexity is the lack of facilities tailored to small-scale operations and the limitations on the types of animals they handle. For small farmers, the scarcity of options often means longer traveling distances, higher costs, and logistical hurdles, leaving them with few viable alternatives. For many years, Virginia has had a dwindling number of USDA-approved meat processing facilities, most of which are privately owned but certified and observed by the USDA. So that's what I was going to try to talk about. But all of these facilities, the USDA doesn't own and operate. What they do is they come in and say, you get to build it, and we will come tell you what's wrong. And a lot of the times it's ex-veterinary, like folks that worked in the veterinary field, so not people that came from farming, but folks that, they come out, and there's always, I'm only going to speak for Virginia, but there's always like a room. You have to have an office for them. And there's a sign on all of these rooms that would say, and you have to legally put it up there too, like, you have no right to privacy in this building, other than in the bathroom. I think there was like one other spot listed, but it was saying that you can't record any of the USDA inspectors. You can't record what they're doing, film them in any way, but they can film, record, take pictures of what you're doing. So it was a very interesting one-lane road from folks that, again, a lot of them, from what I've been told, are not farmers or didn't have a farm background. They usually come from a veterinary or some sort of background like that, because it's hard to find those folks too. So anyways, there's different ideas that have come up around like who should be inspecting, and Judd talks about this a little bit later, but that the whole program was not set up to help farmers in the first place. It's to help protect consumers. But when you look at it in these massive, massive facilities that can process, 1,000 animals a day, it's the same exact standards that are put on them as are put on a farm that's putting out like 2 cattle in a month, right? So they have to uphold the same standards. But at the same time, if you look at like avian flu and all these other, you kind of start to catch on to the picture that like it doesn't matter how regulated they are, even at these massive scales, things keep falling through. And you can look up a list online. I won't go into it, but I did. Of just outbreaks of different things, of different recalls, of different so it's clearly not a system that's working at the big scale, but it's also definitely not working at the small scale, but it's built for the big scale. Fun stuff. Where did we leave off? For many years, Virginia has had a dwindling, Notably, the largest owner of meat processing facilities in Virginia is a Chinese-owned company. This is a fun little bit. This ownership structure prioritizes supporting large-scale national or global operations, leaving smaller farmers at a disadvantage. These facilities often cater exclusively to farms that meet high-volume requirements, making them inaccessible to small-scale operations. For small farmers, it's not just about having a facility nearby. Their choices whittle down when their size, animal type, or production scale doesn't align with the facility's focus. Okay, so funny story. In 2011, Smithfield, some of you may have heard of Smithfield, right? So there's a thing in Virginia when I ask people about like what it's known for or whatever else, they'll say, Virginia ham. So Virginia ham was a whole process of processing an animal and curing the meats in a sense that it's a joke I tell, but as soon as the USDA was created, it was illegal. Essentially, you can't make it the way that it had become famous in a sense. So it's just a namesake that's held on. Well, that namesake is also copyrighted, and it was owned by Smithfield. So Smithfield Ham, which would do Virginia ham. Sometimes you'll hear that called like country ham. Again, these are ties to a different type of product than what is made now, which is safer. I don't know if it's as good, but Smithfield was then bought by a Chinese-owned company in 2011, and they have had not a great track record from what I briefly looked up, but in terms of amount of pollutants they were putting out and like these lawsuits, and we're talking like 75 million and 85 million 2 years apart in terms of what they paid out. But anyways, that term Virginia ham is owned by a company that's owned by a Chinese company. So it's really funny. It's, when you get into naming rights and stuff like that, you can look into it with wines even funnier, with names for wines that are like, don't use the name of the French area. You have to use this other word, but that word is owned by a French-owned company based in California, and you have to pay each time you put that name on it. Whole thing. But anyways, most of the facilities and largest processor is Smithfield. They have all these facilities. Now, to give you an idea, if there's, I don't know, let's say 30 of those facilities for Smithfield or 20, right? Those are for pigs. So you're not going to mix and contaminate or otherwise too. So some facilities are set up just for certain types of animals. So for instance, Judd's facility, which he has turkeys that are dry age heritage breed. Dry age is the important part there. So it's not a wet facility. It doesn't have, in terms of the water lines you need that you would normally for, like, let's say, cleaning out other types of poultry like chicken. So his facility curtails to that. And that's why he started his, because it was too difficult to find other facilities that fit his time or in his area, anything like that. But you'll find that some facilities are just like, we don't do pigs, right? And others, that's all they do. Or there's others that, for instance, I filmed once up at Old Line. I always want to say Cinema. Old Line, which is up in Maryland, and was filming with a farm that was like a kosher. It was a Jewish farm, but they had kosher. So you have to, that facility can't be, or that room especially though, but I think the facility cannot be, it's only cattle, right? Going through there. They may do other things, but yeah, it's not going to have pork. So anyways, that's what whittles down the number of facilities that you can be able to use and what's accessible to you. So again, when it seems like there's a whole bunch, there's really not. And you have to add to that too, when you talk about animal welfare, when you have to take an animal, load them all up, right, and drive them 4 hours or whatever, that's going to stress out everyone on board. So that's the reason for why it's kind of better to have it more localized. Not only that, but same thing, that farmer's got to be managing the farm all day or doing something. So he's got to be able to have somebody there to then go drive, take all these animals somewhere else, have them processed, drop them, and then go back to pick them up, right? It's not a that day kind of thing. There are some exceptions to that, but for the most part, no. I digress. While poultry and rabbits can often be slaughtered on farm under certain exemptions, I'm not getting very far in this. So the exemptions are there were some great people in Virginia that lobbied and tried to get bills passed and whatever else, because so farmers could literally kill their own chickens on their facility, and you can set up your area where you're cleaning and everything else like that, and you have to have somebody from the USDA come out, inspect that, and then you're able to, and it's up to a certain size. I believe it's not ruminants, but like maybe turkeys you can process on property. And there's a certain number. Anyways, gray areas, and I think it changes. So it's up to that point. And there's acts out now too, bills out. The Prime Act is a big one. I'll talk about that in another video. But that's also something to look into. Those are things that can really help these smaller scale farms kind of take back autonomy, because it's all been taken away, saying that, you as the farmer are not responsible enough. And the safety of consumers is of paramount importance. If you hear the sarcasm in my voice, you'll understand. But so we want to take that away from them, and you have to go to these places that we can monitor and we can observe. The purpose and the point, especially when it started, you have to go back and really see the big picture of why these things are the way they are. It's not just to be, an SOB. Read Upton Sinclair's The Jungle and look into the meatpacking industry in New York during that time period too. Everything was getting thrown in. So there was an absolute need to have somebody step in. And there still is to some extent, because if somebody's not watching, people will do bad things. But it's also kind of alienating those that are responsible, or for just the cost efficiencies. If we actually want good food going out, the scale needs to be chopped down. Healthy food that's good for people. And this whole idea of we want to make it cost affordable for the consumer. Tyler and I talked about this. Almost a lot of people that are in meat that do a good job of doing that. I think we all come back to the same point, which is, you should eat less meat. Just eat higher quality when you do. But that's a lot harder to tell somebody that, don't eat the triple cheeseburger. You really don't need that. We're getting off. But I think it's something that's really important to bring up, is that, our consumption levels and what we do when we want to go out and hyper consume or, waste a ton of food. It's why the food becomes so low quality. And it's built into the infrastructure of our food system to such a deep level. It's going to be hard to pull out of that, which is, for grocery stores, for so many other things, we overprocess and waste so much food. With meat, though, I think it is far more, I think it's more important to not waste meat if you eat meat. And that's the thing about this too, is I think there is this growing middle ground of people that, for those that don't want to eat meat, that's fine. For whatever reasons you have for that. For those of us that do and think that it is a part of nature, I think that it is very interesting how much you feel like you can't argue for, raising an animal right, on good food, treating it well. There's a great line for this. You are what you eat, and what you eat eats. But on top of that too, it's what you eat and how you treat what you eat, I think is important. You should play with your food, is essentially what I'm saying. So, and these are all great people in here. I'm just looking at the pictures. They're beautiful too. Sorry. So anyways, I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit because I keep going along. Efforts have been made to address this issue. In recent years, Virginia State, you know what? I don't want to go into that part. I'll skip to the next. The Judd Culver of Kelly Brown's Turkeys in Crozet offers a different perspective. His operation produces around 4,000 to 5,000 dry-aged turkeys a year, a rarity in U.S. markets, necessitating a specific processing style without water. Sorry, I already talked about this. The issue for his farm is finding a processing facility that would be able to custom process his product. For him, navigating USDA regulations wasn't as much of a barrier because of his background and animal science and expertise with USDA inspected facilities. So he went about building his own facility on his farm. Judd is an anomaly. He has another job too, but he knows that world. He knows how to speak that language. He knows how to navigate it in certain ways too, though. He made I think, a very smart move in how he's gone about doing that too. But most farmers do not come in where it's kind of like, I want to build an add-on garage or something. It's a totally different thing. And what you have to submit for, what they're going to come in and inspect and look for. It's just a totally different thing. And again, he also has a very unique product, delicious turkeys. And I showed up one of the days too, actually, years ago. I went to go do a shoot and somebody didn't show up accidentally. So I was, I think they're called sworn in. I had to take a course or a class, and then ended up coming back and then helping process, I think it was 500 turkeys. Not me personally, but just jumped in where it was necessary. But that's the biggest thing too, is that, he's raising these birds, and you have to imagine before, I'm not going to give anything away here. It's around Thanksgiving, a month or whatever before. He has to process all of those. So he's going through and processing. So that facility's not up and running all year round. It's for when he needs it for that. But anyways, he dives into a little bit, and these are the groups that you need to know about. But in fact, he defends the USDA and the FSIS, which is the Food Safety and Inspection Service. The agency wasn't set up to help farmers. It was set up to protect citizens from bad actors selling unsafe food, he explains. But in the last 10 to 15 years, I've seen them trying to change the way they do business and be more helpful to small farms. And this is kind of my point. It's really not a blame game of saying like they're the bad ones, the bad actors or whatever else. It's understanding too where like that organization where everything was built from, and to pivot something like that, something so large, is not that quick, is not that easy. And I'm sure if you talk to farmers, they will say too, like, doesn't take that long. So I think there's a bit of back and forth on that, but I think it was also important not to just make this an article that was about hitting on its regulation. That's the only problem. It is a big problem, but it's not the only problem. Part of the problem too is consumers. You know, we all love the idea of this stuff, but when we see the price tag, we've been so ingrained with how cheap it can be that we don't understand how expensive it should be, right? And the value of that. However, even Culver acknowledges the challenges of scaling. Sorry, I forgot, about this. Building our facility was a huge capital investment, he says. For someone new to farming without experience dealing with the USDA, it's nearly impossible to catch up. He believes partnerships could be a solution. If we had 5 farmers come together, and that's the whole idea, like finding cooperative models. But then, how do you do that? How do you find 5 people that everyone's kind of at the same scale? And you're basically, if any of you have been an entrepreneur before, when you start to get into like equity conversations or like talking about like, how much of the company do you have? How much do I have? What am I responsible for? You're not going to find 5 people that are at the same scale doing the same exact thing. Or maybe, I don't think so. So it's really kind of tough to find that unity around that. It usually comes about from like serious frustration with government bureaucracy. So there's hope. But that's kind of the area that would come from, in my opinion. It's not just about feeding people. It's about saving a skill that's disappearing, says Logan Twerdy of Shirefolk Farms in Fluvanna County. After years of struggling with inaccessible processing options, Twerdy and his family decided to pivot away from commercial sales, focusing instead on whole animal processing for family and friends. This shift also allows them to partner with another farm to offer master butcher classes aimed at preserving the art of butchery for future generations. So Shirefolk Farms is a great farm. Emily and Logan run that one. And what they end up doing too, a lot of it too, I mean, Emily's into permaculture and all these things. Logan goes out and does inspections for, or works with the Rodale Institute. So trying to help farms convert in a sense. So it's really interesting. When we were talking about processing, I did a dinner event and I worked with them, but I wanted to make sure I went out and processed the animals with them, mostly just to hang out. But we were talking about that too. It's just, it's too much of a pain. It gets to a certain point where it's like, we're still going to raise animals, but just enough for us. And it's hard to argue with that. And instead, what they've been focusing on, there's another farm called Hand Hewn Farm. So they're based out of Ohio. And so they came out and I attended this thing and I covered the whole event, but it was a 3-day workshop on whole animal butchery. So we went out in the woods. We read a poem by Wendell Berry. We took a shot of scotch. I'm not sure if I did or not. And then in the woods, shot the pig, right? And this is something that is it was very, very interesting. One, to see that and experience it, but also to take that animal through the whole process over 3 days, down to making, bacon and curing that and whatever else. But anyways, it is a dying art. So it is something when you talk about processing though, and being able to experience, in a very unique setting, what that actually means and how that brings people. It's not a one person thing. It is a community building thing. For me, at least, it was giving reverence to this animal and a chance to say thank you, in my own kind of weird way of how I view everything as sentient. So it's not necessarily what you're choosing to eat. It's what you're choosing to give back, and how involved, how ignorant are you trying to be to have your bliss. And it was kind of amazing to see, because I've been in a few of these other facilities too. And, regardless, it's like talking to EMTs or nurses, like you develop this dark humor because you have to, for dealing with that stuff day in, day out. And I think the same thing of, processing day in, day out. But when you're not, and you're doing it in this way that kind of is, that's what's really been lost, is it's the ritual from this whole thing. And so it was really great to be able to experience that and include that in this, but also to see a farm adapting and saying like, all right, I'm not really making enough on that end of it too. And you know, classes aren't happening all the time. You have to look ahead, and they have some coming up, but it is something that, again, if you eat meat, I kind of went into this with a friend recently, you know, should you go through that process once in your life, at least? You know, if you enjoy it, if you appreciate it, and that's fine. I just think in our food system, ignorance can no longer be bliss. Not everyone has the opportunity to do something like that, but if you do, where you have the opportunity to see what goes into that, you know, and to appreciate it for what it is, not to anthropomorphize it too much, not to desensitize to it at all, but to feel something, I would recommend the experience. That being said, they were able to pull this together in their farm, of having this workshop and inviting these guys over so that we were able to do that. And the other people that were attending were pretty much all other farmers and other enthusiasts, but it was, you know, a mix. And then there's me. Already emphasizes how these workshops are more than about just teaching technique. I'm going to hate myself. I just said this. They're about helping farmers take back control of their food systems. When you can't find a processing slot, you're left with few options, he explains. That's why we started doing everything ourselves. But not every farmer can or should become their own butcher. Now, mind you, again, to sell, if you consume it within your own family, you can do that. If you are selling it commercially, it has to be processed at a USDA facility, unless it is, there are exceptions with, I mentioned earlier, with some fowl, right? And smaller animals, rabbits. The root of the problem lies in vertical integration and consolidation of the meat processing industry. 4 corporations control roughly 85% of the nation's meat processing. I also don't know if I mixed this up and it was globally, but like these, you have to look at like how massive these companies are, and that's not including Smithfield, right? It is massive. Regulations designed to ensure food safety disproportionately burden small farmers, who often face exorbitant costs for compliance, from installing costly non-porous surfaces to meeting drainage and equipment standards required by the USDA guide. It's onerous. It really is. And it's stuff too. And again, I don't mean to say it's not important. It's just kind of like, you serious? For the amount of things that, again, if you're a multi-million-dollar facility, for sure, put all that on them. It's just weird when you're trying to put that same standard on like a small business and then expect that that's good. And possibly I need to do more interviews and I just don't know enough, but I'm happy to learn more. Opening a new facility is fraught with challenges. Navigating USDA guidelines, securing grants, and retaining trained workers are significant hurdles. It's a massive process. Thomas admits, even when grants are available, you need a great writer just to get through the paperwork. So what this is bringing up is like the USDA offers grants. It's funny, they don't open up the facilities and pay for all of them. That goes on to businesses, right, to have that. And then again, it's disproportionate. But they offer some grants and stuff like that. But again, you have to take time, have a grant writer. You got to get it right. So you kind of already got to be in to know how to get in, or have experience around, know how to speak the language. And most people don't. But it's not all bad experiences. I need to preface all of this and say it's not all bad experiences. I've talked to a couple farms where they say that their USDA inspector, like they have facilities that their inspector, like they're great people, right? So these are not like villains in some kind of way. It's the structure of the system and how that's set up. And these folks are kind of put in the middle of that too. And sometimes they are different stories. But I don't want it to come across like, everybody that's doing that, inspectors. Again, there's no one villain in this. It's not a superhero movie, okay? It's never that simple. It's a more nuanced narrative, and it's a lot of different steps in that too. And part of that too is on consumers as well. We talk an awful lot about wanting things or valuing it, but then, voting with our dollars or backing up with our, where we spend, and it's hard because you're still going to go for that cheaper, easier, more convenient option. Anyways, back into this. Consumers also play a crucial role in shaping the future of meat processing and small-scale farming. But understanding the challenges farmers face, consumers can make informed decisions that directly impact local food systems. Supporting local farmers and butchers doesn't just help keep businesses afloat, it preserves a way of life. As we pull back the curtain on the meat processing industry, it's clear there are no easy answers, just good questions to start asking. Questions like, where does my meat come from? Who raised it, and how was it processed? What kind of practices does this farm implement? They're the beginning of a dialogue that could change the way we eat and support people who make our meals possible. The in-betweeners who get quality meat from a family farm to a family's table. This awareness can shift the demand away from industrial systems and towards community-focused solutions. For now, the answers lie in simple, small steps. Find a local farmer's market, meet the person who raised your food, choose a farm that prioritizes transparency and sustainable practices. These decisions might not fix the system overnight, but they can create ripples of change. Behind every steak or drumstick is a story. Adorable. Good job, DJ. And it's up to us to make sure it's one worth consuming. Go find people making good food and support the hell out of them. I'm not that type. It's not a mic drop. All right, so part of that is that in terms of the small steps, I would say if you wanted to do something, go find a farmer's market. If you're just curious about it, like, hey, I read this thing. What is processing like? Like, is it an easy thing? Like, what's that day kind of like? Going there, coming back, whatever else like that too. And you'll hear some interesting stories. But again, you want to start diving into your food system a little bit deeper, learning about these things. The reason being is that it should take away the sticker shock of when something is more expensive or priced adequately, and seeing why that is. But also you can go to these folks too and see, there are farms too that will do workshops around some of this stuff too if you're interested in learning yourself. If you're not, which I assume the majority of people are not, and that is totally fine. But I think still being aware of that, and even honestly, if you don't eat meat, I still think it's good to ask about like what some of those practices are. But if you are eating meat and you're interested in continuing to do so in your life, it's just good to know about that, where these products are coming from, where the sources are, and how it affects people's lives that are around you, all the way to your table. But this idea of things just popping up magically, in a grocery store or otherwise, or kids nowadays not even realizing where that drumstick came from or how you make a chicken nugget. Boy, is that interesting. It's probably one of the most important things that you can do. Ooh, look. Chilled duck breast with cherries, watercress, leeks, and ricotta. Okay. Go try that. Thanks.
It's funny.